Let's talk about questions and the use of questions as an associate trainer. Why is questioning such an important technique to use when you're developing people's skills? Well, when you ask a question, you engage a learner's mind. They start thinking and they're paying attention, and they're also thinking about how the learning fits into their own knowledge, context, and experience. So asking questions is great. And it's important for you to ask effective questions. Some questions are more effective than others. So let's talk about some different types of questions you can ask. The first is an open question. And you may be familiar with this term, but what's an open question? Well, that was an example of an open question right there. It's a question that cannot be answered with a simple yes, no, or other short answer. It invites you to provide a considered and detailed response. It invites you to provide your own ideas and suggestions. Open questions are really effective. There's also something called an overhead question. Now, an open question can also be an overhead question. An overhead question means you've just asked it to the room in general. You haven't asked it to a particular person. Overhead questions are good because you see who's interested in the topic. You can see by looking at their eyes who's engaging with the question, whose eyes light up. But sometimes when you ask an overhead question, nobody answers. There's silence. So sometimes you need to switch the overhead question to a direct question. A direct question is when you ask a particular person. John, what do you think about this? Sue, what would be your way of handling this situation? An important thing to remember when you ask a direct question is list the name first. Just paying attention to the question. You're not trying to catch them out. You're trying to engage them. So first say, John, let me ask you a question, and then ask your question. Now, there's something called the 3P technique, which lets you combine overhead and direct questions. The first P is to pose the overhead question. So you ask the question to the room, and then you pause, the second P. Just wait to see who answers. Maybe make eye contact with someone. And if no one answers, then you move to the third P, which is person, meaning you direct the question to the person. So you pose the question, you pause and see if anyone answers, and then if no one does, you direct to a particular person. Now, there are three other types of questions that are not as effective most of the time. One of them is a closed question. A closed question is really only a yes, no type of question. John, is the sky blue? Closed questions tend not to be very engaging, but they can be useful in confirming understanding or double checking that someone understands information. The two types of questions you really need to watch out for. First one, unclear questions. This is when you've asked a question that you did not formulate very clearly in your head. It's kind of vague, and there's a long pause afterwards and no one answers, not because they're shy, but because they really did not understand your question. So try to prepare your questions in advance before you ask them so that they're clear. The other type of question is actually questions, multiple questions, where you're formulating the question as you go and you keep modifying the question. So what's the importance of learning, and how does learning affect people, and what kind of learning do we do at DKH, and what's your role in it? Wow, that's 4 questions right there. Which one do I answer? It's overwhelming. So try to avoid multiple questions. Generally speaking, your open, overhead, and direct questions are the most effective. Closed questions can be used to confirm understanding, and the 3P technique helps you start with an overhead and move to a direct question. Start thinking about how you can ask effective questions and which effective questions you will ask when you're delivering your training.